Hey guys, it's Craig, your garden guy with Yard to Table Creations, and we're going to talk a little bit about maybe some myths and some other kind of misnomers, things you might hear about gardening that may or may not be true. I kind of garden from the point of do what works for you. There is a few hard and fast rules. Obviously plants need sun, they need water. They need a few basic things for them to do what they do, but outside of that, there's a lot of different ways you can do things. So one of the things that I run across with a lot of clients is advice about tomatoes, and that you have to prune it this way, or you have to treat it this way, or you have to do this, you have to do that. Okay, none of that's true. You just have to understand what you're getting into depending on how you want to do it. So we're going to go through a couple different examples of how we can grow tomatoes, and I tend to be a let it go free kind of guy. So this is what a lot of my gardens will look like this time of year with tomatoes. I don't do a ton of pruning to them. There are some drawbacks to not pruning out your trees because obviously this is very dense, so you're not getting a ton of air flow through here. So you do run the risk of creating a greenhouse environment where you might be more at risk for molds and mildews. Also, it's just not as pretty. And if you're going after the quote unquote Instagram garden, there's definitely a different way to do this. But in this case, if you really need to do some pruning, you'll hear things about, well, you got to prune the suckers. I don't think so, because the suckers will produce fruit. I like to leave all the parts of the plant that we can that are going to produce fruit so I get as much as possible. But what we can prune are things like these big broad leaves that you see here that are never going to produce fruit. These are there just as solar panels. They're there just for photosynthesis. And obviously there is a whole lot of them. So if you want to clean this up and you want to open this up, you're going to need to go through here and pinch off a lot of these larger broad leaves. Also, when you're growing like this, as tomatoes grow, especially the smaller varieties, the cherry varieties, as they grow, all the fruit is being produced, the new fruit is being produced at the end of the branches. And as the fruit starts to ripen down lower, you're gonna see the plant wanting to start to slough off excess leaves. So essentially what we're doing here by pruning is what the plant will naturally do on its own as it matures. So what'll happen is these leaves will start to dry up and they'll start to look a little ragged. Anybody who's had any experience gardening knows that the August, September timeline in the garden is kind of ugly. Everything starts to brown out, everything's getting towards the end of its season, and that's just part of it. You'll see a lot of pictures, again, the Instagram gardens of these perfect gardens in August. I'll hedge my bets and say that's a picture from earlier in the year because I've never seen a garden in August that looks perfect. So if you're going to grow in this fashion, which we'll, for lack of a better term, we'll call it a wild bush. If we're gonna let this thing go wild and turn into the full-size plant that it can be, don't use these. You find these at Home Depot, they're really cheap. You see them everywhere, but I don't know about you, but I can see a little bit of a size issue here. This plant's going to outgrow this in its first few weeks. So if you're going to grow it like this, you're going to need a beefier cage, so to speak. This is more along the lines of what you're going to need, not only to give the plant enough room to grow, but also to create enough structure, because once it's full of fruit, this plant's going to get really heavy and branches are going to start falling over, they're going to be breaking. You're going to have your fruit laying on the ground where the worms and the pill bugs and everybody else can get to it. This way, this is acting as a trellis, but it's also acting as like just the main structure to keep your plant growing vertically and allowing you to keep your fruit off the ground. Again, way too small. This works really good for like peppers, smaller plants, eggplant. I use these for eggplant. I don't use these for tomatoes. Go with a beefier cage. You'll be happy you did. Here's another way of doing this, which is basically the polar opposite of the wild bush method back there. It's good to mention that those are the determinate tomatoes, which means all the flowers set at once, all the fruit sets at once, and by at once, I mean within a few weeks, you get all the fruit off and then the plant is done. The plant will actually still continue to grow, it just really won't produce much, and certainly not enough for you to be worth keeping the plant. So once you get the majority of the fruit, you yank those bad boys out of the ground, toss them. If it's early enough in the season, maybe you try a second planting. I'd probably just move on. And then we have some indeterminate varieties here. And with an indeterminate tomato, it continues to produce fruit for the entire time the plant is actually growing. And this is a really good example of what to do with indeterminate tomatoes. If we let this go into a wild bush, you're just going to have fruit everywhere. These types of cherry tomatoes, they grow into a large sprawling plant that's just going to spread everywhere. So you either have to build quite a trellis system to kind of pull everything up and have all these thin arms and branches going in different directions, or you can do what's done here, which is to prune this down to a single leader. Now, by doing this, you are definitely going to reduce the quantity of fruit that you're able to produce because you are pruning off a majority of the fruiting part of the plant. But in this case, for space purposes, there's obviously just a narrow gap here, not really enough room for these to sprawl out, not enough room to build a giant trellis like we have back there. So instead we have string here on a pole, and we have these tied up to the string. Now what's been done here is you can see all these cuts. All these branches have been cut off. And obviously after this one finishes producing these last pieces of fruit, this will come off. And as we go, it'll continue to produce fruit on the top newest branches. Again, you're going to reduce your yield, your total yield, but you are going to have a much more manageable plant. This is a great way to grow vertically. If you don't have a large family and you're not trying to produce 50 pounds of cherry tomatoes per plant, you don't need that much. This is a great technique for your indeterminate varieties. Now let's talk a little bit about how things actually go in the garden, because let's be real, we're all busy, we all work, a lot of us have kids, you know, I've got middle schooler in sports, like things are busy. So the intention is to come in here and prune these like the single leader tomatoes that we had over there, but then life gets in the way and things happen, and you can see they've been pruned down here a little bit, and then as you get up here it starts to get a little bit more wild. This is really just a symptom of it's easier just to ignore it and let it do its thing after a while than it is to come in here and diligently prune every day all the way up. It's not just a time thing, but also it can just get annoying. There's nothing wrong with leaving some extra fruiting branches on here so that we don't have to focus so much on pruning and can spend a little bit more time out here just enjoying the garden. You can grow this as 1 liter, but because we have all of this support here, we can go ahead and let the top half of this plant go a little bit wild. It's going to give us a little bit more of a yield. Also, it's going to take it off your plate of having to come out here every day or every other day and prune away. Some people really like it. I find it very cathartic at times, but also I have a real life and I don't always have the time to come out here and manicure these plants. Like I mentioned earlier, gardens are utilitarian. At the end of the day, they're here to create food. You don't have to have the perfect garden. You're never gonna have the perfect garden. The only thing I found that is guaranteed in gardening is that you're gonna have a different problem next year. So take all advice with a grain of salt. Don't skip the basics. Make sure your water's correct. Make sure you have enough sunlight. Make sure you have the right structure for your plants. Make sure you understand how big your plants are going to get and also how big you want them to get. Spend a little time doing some research on what these plants are expect to yield and decide how much of that you actually need, and you can plan your pruning accordingly. But most importantly, do what works for you. Do it the way that you want to do it. Do it the way that you like it, and don't necessarily listen to everybody else's opinion all the time. There's your 3 main ways to grow tomatoes. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at any time on social media or YouTube or at our email, website, whatever suits your fancy.